Welcome to the Legendary Leadership Summit 2019 with Cody, Dakota, Wooten.
And we are here with Joanne Nadell. Now, Joanne's awesome. She's got 30 years in the hot seat of negotiating divorce settlements and hundreds of cases of successfully building and managing her own highly respected law firm. Joanne speaks to business owners, entrepreneurs, educators, community leaders, people who want to be legendary leaders like us, and on the magic and power of mindful negotiations. And she shares that expertise and valuable experience training that frazzles most business owners and professionals. So, Joanne, welcome to the Legendary Leadership Summit.
Thank you so much, Cody, for having me. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone.
Absolutely. I'm super excited because, like, being part of the legal system, it's such an interesting field, and there's so much you need to know to be successful in the law field, and you have had that success, and you've helped hundreds of people get through what is a very tricky system.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how the system has changed over the years. I've been practicing divorce and family law for 30 years. And when I started, it was a much more genteel, humanist type of a process. You know, it was slow and there were time for people to make decisions. And now, especially I practice in New Jersey, everything is regimented. There are time frames that things have to be done by. There are what they call the best practices, which, you know, when you're dealing with families and children, having a rule doesn't always apply.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because you need laws in order to keep control of things. However, there are sometimes situations that are just completely different than what the laws could comprehend at the time. That's part of the reason why our Constitution was written the way it was. It's because our founding fathers foresaw that there were going to be situations that they would have no clue could happen at that time, and they knew that there might be changes that needed to be made.
Exactly. And in the process of, you know, families and you know, in family cases and particularly in divorce cases, a lot of people think they kind of know what the rules are, what their friends told them, what the Greek chorus next door is telling them, what their girlfriends tell them, but that's not always true. And part of, you know, educating people about what's going to happen and managing their expectations as far as how long it's going to take, what they can reasonably expect, is a major part of what I do with my clients.
That's absolutely amazing. Absolutely wonderful. So talk to me about negotiations, and I mean, we can say why they're important within the terms of leadership and everything. I think we all kind of know they're important, but sometimes we just don't want to recognize that they're important.
Well, it's fun because I have been doing my family law work for a long time. And one of the things that people really aren't good at, not only just in business, but in daily life, is getting what they want or negotiating when they find themselves in conflict. So there really isn't a much better definition of a conflict than a divorce case. And
no kidding. And divorce has risen in the United States, and I think that's a testament to how much conflict people are having challenges with.
Exactly. So over the past year, what I've done is I've developed a program more out of my law practice, but doing consulting and training with people, teaching them how to be better at resolving conflict by becoming superior negotiators, so that every conversation that you have, in one way or another, is a negotiation. So from everyday people and communities or neighbors or those types, or to corporate teams, or differences between management and teams, differences between coworkers, those elements of conflict, or like the other lady was saying, the sales team versus the accounting team that we saw on your last interview. I'm putting together and have put together a program to teach people to how to just figure out how to get around the object of the conflict and find a solution.
What I love about what you said there is get around the object of the conflict, because
Right.
so often what happens with anybody in business, in relationships, whatever it is something comes up as the conflict, and what people end up doing is they ram their head against that conflict over and over and over again, just like that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like I've been there before. I've been that person. So, and I'm sure in the future I'll be that person again.
Not
So,
after today. You're going to learn some good things. Good tip.
well, hopefully instead of like the 20 times I would normally do it, it's just like 2 times. And then I go, oh yeah, wait, that's what Joanne told me.
Yes.
So, but like within that, right? There's
Mhm.
always a way around whatever that is, right? Like you could try and go through it and get some sort of tool to break it down. You could try and go over it. You could try and go under it. You could try and go
Yes.
around it. Like
Yes.
there's so many other options that are usually out there, and we just don't utilize them. We just stare at the conflict and beat our head against it.
Well, what I'm going to talk about today in my presentation is how I infuse mindfulness techniques, which helps to bring the level of conflict down, and then using interest-based negotiation skills, focusing on what does each person need, as opposed to who's right or who's wrong. You don't have to have just winners and losers. If you're creative and you actually think about it, you can come up with an answer that works for both people.
Absolutely. And so often we think of negotiations or sales or so many other things as win-lose. Like, I am righteous and correct in what I say, and you're a sinner and terrible person because of the thing you say. And like most of the time that's not true. I'm not going to say it's never true. Like there are some very out there cases where it might be true, but that is not the norm for the most part. I mean, most people are not awful people. Most people want good things to happen, and most people are not as self-righteous as they think they are. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know what you mean. I've sat across the table from many people like that. Yeah.
I'm sure you have.
It's regrettable that sometimes their attorney buys into that agenda, buys into that mindset, and makes it worse and not better.
Absolutely. Tell me if I'm wrong in this thinking, but part of me almost wonders that lawyers are a form of leader. They're a leader within the legal system.
Right.
And you have some people who have the leadership position of being a lawyer who are not leading the people they are supposed to be leading well, and they're kind of catering to what that person is asking for instead of providing what it is that they actually need.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. One of the things that makes my practice, exceptional is that I focus on collaborative divorce. I don't know if you're not familiar with it, but it's very common in some states, in New Jersey in particular, where the goal is to work as a team to resolve the case. You don't go to court. So you don't have to posture. You don't have to say you want $1 million if you really only need 250. It goes right to the heart of the problem, and it helps people decide early on what is the best thing for them to do in terms of making a resolution. And when you come to it with that approach, and really my mindful negotiations technique came out of that practice, where I saw over and over again that it's absolutely possible to resolve a conflict without destroying anything or anyone. And that's always been my goal. Even when I was, one of those crazy saber rattling kind of, warrior types back in the 80s, 90s, it was not who I was. It sounds so corny, but I've always been more of a lover than a fighter. So how on God's name I became a divorce lawyer, it still stumps me. But I had a knack for helping people. I had a knack for guiding people through a very personal and difficult process and helping them get to the other side intact and ready to face the future, and bringing their children with them in the best way possible. So my work now is really just an offshoot of something I've been practicing throughout my career. It just, it's just nice to have it evolve. The world has evolved, and I've either caught up with the world or the world has caught up with me, and many more people are accepting that mediation and collaborative work. But I do almost my entire practice is mediation. It's an alternate form of resolving disputes. We don't go to court. We don't have to go to court until it's done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, much better.
So one of the things that I heard you talk about, and this is like the second or third time I've brought up this book because I think it's fantastic. It's called Outwitting the Devil. I love this book. It's fantastic.
I'm a fan.
Okay, you've read Outwitting the Devil.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm not alone here. You think it's pretty good too.
It's funny that it's timeless. And no matter where you are in your career or in your development or what path your work is, all of those points make sense. I've been a Napoleon Hill student for many, many years, and this one and the one about the 10 Feet from Gold, or I can't remember the title, but again, you need to incorporate those lessons in what you do. And when you read it, you think, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. How am I going to do that? That's nothing like me. I can't do that. And then, wow, if you really take the time and share what you're looking for with other people, you get the guidance that you need.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you actually found that within the story of what you're telling, because one of the things that's a major point in this book, he talks about the cosmic habit force, where you have like people after people after people who perpetuate this story. And so when new people enter into that story, they get perpetuated into that same idea, that same concept. And when it's not a positive thing, it can lead to very negative results. And it sounded like to me, when you went into the legal world, you had that brandishing sword and like, this is how we do it, charge ahead, we are going to win kind of attitude, which it sounds like that was kind of what was the pervasive attitude in the legal world at that time.
Many people, for many lawyers and for many people, it still is.
Exactly.
I happen to be blessed to be in a community where, in practicing, where a lot of people see the benefits of that. It's old-fashioned. It costs 10 times more, and it really, it eats your kishkas. makes people so upset for every day. Every day they're upset for a year and a half.
Yeah.
It's just not a nice way to live, and it's not a nice way to say goodbye to somebody you were in love with once.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that also shows the testament, one, to how difficult it is to get out of that perpetuating system.
Mhm.
But two, what happens when you get a group of people outside of the perpetual
Yes.
system creating a new perpetual system?
Mhm.
Because what you were
Mhm.
saying also was that you've gotten out of it yourself, and you found a group, and that
Mhm.
either you are catching up or the world is catching up to the idea of a win-win situation,
Right.
of not a sword brandishing, we're going to win the fight kind of attitude within
Right.
the legal world. It sounds like
Yes.
you're finding that.
Yes. And also, many attorneys outside of my focus is on family law, but many of my colleagues and a lot of people that we work with, the alternate dispute resolution in many states, in California, Jersey, a lot of them, it's become the focal point of how they're going to resolve conflict, using arbitration, using mediators. Half the time, when you make an application to the courts and family court, they go see a mediator and then come back. It's not that they don't want to do their job. It's they're overworked, but the reality is even the judges are recognizing this is a much better process. And so it works unless you're bringing lawyers with that old school mentality. Old school's not polite, but that World War One view, world view one, whatever I'm trying to say that Napoleon calls it, to the table, then you're still have a bad branch. But if you have professionals who can teach their clients a better, simpler, kinder way to resolve their conflict, and that's what I'm trying to teach people.
Absolutely. And there's so much power in that, and not just in the legal system where, let's face it, we could use it because of how often people are at battle. And we don't need more people at battle. We need more people doing good work in the world.
Exactly.
Right. And when we're always battling each other, there's no room to create anything positive outside of that. And these skills I can very easily understand would be so transferable to every aspect of life.
Yes.
Whether it's divorce or whether it's you're in a family you want to keep and you want to be able to have these skills so that everyone
Absolutely.
wins.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're in business with your team, you want your team to perform better, and you want them to feel like they're winning as well. And within
Mm-hmm.
your organization, the biggest level, you want everyone in there to be winning. Because if
Yes.
not everyone in the business is winning, people get fired usually, or let go, or whatever other thing, and it's not a fun position to be a part of.
Right.
And if you can avoid that peacefully, it's a golden system in my mind.
And if you have tools, like I will be teaching today, if you have tools to resolve conflict, you don't have to run away from it. You don't have to ignore it. You don't have to just hope it'll disappear when you come in the next day. You teach it. I mean, another component of my work is I'm developing programs I want to take into schools, because schools have tremendous effort and money and resources being given to anti-bullying training and teaching children, how to recognize bullying and how not to do it. But I haven't seen that there's the other side of the component, which is teaching the children how not to get into that situation. Like if something's happening and it's not right, teaching them skills. And even little young children in schools now are being taught about mindfulness and being mindful. And, the mindful negotiations is just the next step.
Absolutely. And what we're getting in here is problems with the educational system, which when I went through the educational system, my expectation was that the educational system was going to provide me everything I needed to succeed in life.
That's what your parents thought too.
And that's what they thought. And, my grandparents thought the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not. And I didn't discover that. Like, it's not that they didn't do what they were designed to do.
Right.
The problem wasn't that was, I went to good schools. I'm not saying the schools I went to were like awful schools. What I'm saying is that they didn't teach me the skills I needed to actually succeed. Mm. They taught me very specific knowledge, which is fantastic to have. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having that knowledge, and that knowledge has served me well. However, there are just skills like negotiation, like mindfulness, like understanding money, right? Like communication with actual human beings. These were things that weren't taught to me. I had to discover them and teach myself how to do that. Yeah. There's a whole generation rising up without these skills, and they think they should have these skills, and then they actually get into the scenarios and they don't know what to do.
I agree with you. I talk a little bit today about how the behavior of younger people, and my kids just are on the cusp of millennials, so I am an authority on the subject, having lived through it. That the communication. I work in a big building, and I walk down the hall, and people walk past me, no good morning, looking down at the ground, maybe on their phone. So you're going to learn something about me because I just say, "Hey, good morning." I can't
There's
help
a human?
myself.
There's a human being here? What's this?
I know I shouldn't do that, but I can't help myself. Yeah.
No, I think that's actually a really good thing, because so many people that are a part of my generation, I'm part of that millennial generation, we don't have those skills. And the thing is, if no one helps pull us out of our comfort zone, we're not going to have those skills. Mm-hmm. And more people than not don't know how to teach themselves these skills. I'm one of the lucky few that's more of a go-getter, and so I will figure these things out. But most people don't function like that. That's just not who they are. Right. And so they need other individuals who will walk up to them and say, "Hey, good morning. I see ya. Hi. You want to look? Hey, how's it going? You're a human being. I'm a human being. Let's talk."
Sometimes I feel badly that, they stumble or they drop their phone, and then I think, "Oh, geez, I should mind my business," but it's not my nature.
I say don't do that. I say be a rebel. Fight against the system and help people. Help people get the skills that they actually need. That's my vote. I wish more people would have done that when I was younger. And, again, going back to Napoleon Hill, there's just a lot of people who don't know these things, and they don't know how to get around them. And so it's up to people who do know it, people like us who see these things, to actually take a stand and do something about it.
Another excellent tool is How to Win Friends and Influence People. It sounds, I suppose to younger people, it sounds like corny or something that your mother or father would read, but it's a fabulous.
I've got it right here. And look, you might be able to see it. I've got a whole bunch of notes in here and stuff that make it like you can't close it because it's so, like, I squeeze that and you can still see.
I have hundreds of books that look like that. That's just the way I am. It's good to be a nerd. You can learn a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, nerds rule the world. That's a whole different story, though. We don't have to go down that.
No, that's off topic, I guess.
Oh, my goodness. But seriously, people need to know this type of information. And so I know that you specialize in conflict management and negotiation. So let's dive into that.
Okay.
What does that look like in a way that people can be win-win and not be sword brandishing, self-righteous people who end up just usually more or less douchebags?
Perfect. I think there's two parts, and this is what I talk about in my presentation, that one of the most important things is to be able to understand what is the other person thinking. We are programmed that when we have a conflict, when we're trying to work something out with other people, like you said about you hitting the wall again and again and again. And it's because all you see is your side of the problem. And people get so engaged in trying to understand what they're going to do and how they're going to make it better that they're not hearing anything else that's going on around them. So one of my, the biggest things in mindfulness is just shutting your mouth and trying to hear what the other person is saying. It's obviously there's more to it than that, but in terms of body language and use of words and the sound of your voice, all of that. But what I try to do is to show people, just like how those books give you hints of how you should behave to get better results than what you're looking for. That's what I try to do. I try to break it down and give them a list of techniques that will help them break that mold, break that, approach to conflict. Because when you're going back and forth like this, nobody wins. Or, one of them wins and the other one's like, oh my God. And that's not good either.
Or the other way they could end up, I hate you so much because you're such a jerk, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. And I, the work when I and the people that I work with, my colleagues, which includes not only other family lawyers, but also financial professionals and mental health professionals. We give the family all the tools they need to dissolve the marriage, to break apart the finances, but you're still a family when we're done. And that's really the power and the magic of this technique that I've been talking about.
Absolutely. And that can be really powerful thing to show a young person in general,
Mm-hmm.
that parents have the ability to make that split, but
Yes.
still be together, still be good parents,
Yes.
and not be like battling each other. One of my best friends growing up, his parents had divorced, but they had a relationship like that. He and we played lacrosse together, and both of his parents would always be at the games. They would usually have like a date or a significant other with them, but they were always amicable.
Right.
Like there was never any conflict to speak of between that. And
or they didn't let their son see the conflict,
which is still very powerful. Yeah, it's still very and like not only didn't they not let him see it, but like none of us ever saw it either. And so like that I think divorce is sad in general, but to know that people can do it in a way where both people end up winning, it's nice to know that can happen.
That it can happen. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, because like I grew up without a father because my mother discovered that my father was married to another woman at the same time as her, right? So she obviously got a divorce. That makes sense. And then he made the decision to not be a part of my life.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's how life happens sometimes. People do crazy, ridiculous things that might make sense to them, but have impacts that can, impact other people outside of that.
Right.
And if that would have been the only example I had of what a divorce could look like,
Oh,
I would see every single divorce as, okay, well, there's a single parent kid coming up,
right.
right?
Mhm.
But like, I
Mhm.
know that's not how it always is.
Right.
That you can have parents who want to stay in the life of a kid even after a divorce. So it's nice to be able to see that.
Yes. Yeah. And it is possible. It is possible. And people are finding their way to professionals who offer that service. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the skills that are needed and
Okay.
have to be understood so that we can have these win-win situations. Let's go through some of these.
Okay. Should I do that through my PowerPoint, or we'll
Uh,
just do?
you know what? Whatever makes you most comfortable. I'm usually a very easygoing guy. So
Uh-huh.
if you want to do a PowerPoint, you can throw that PowerPoint up there and we'll rock and roll.
It's up to you. I'm happy to go into it.
It's your
Okay.
call.
So, one of the things, about doing the divorce work is what I've learned about negotiating is there's a whole new way now to bring it to people. So let's take a look at the mindful parts of it, right? Now, mindfulness is a concept that many, many people have heard of, but it started over 3,000 years ago. My work isn't quite as it's not as formal, as intense as the doctrine of mindfulness. So I don't want to have any disrespect there. But basically, the mindful techniques that I use let me show people that there's a much easier way to identify the conflict and to try to put it into perspective. So, you know, as we've been talking, we've identified several areas where conflict comes in. It's in relationships, it could be in business, it's in your own family, it's between nations. I mean,
Oh
our
yeah.
country and many countries have high levels of conflict. So, the conflict, the way we fix the conflict by being mindful is taking a look at what exactly does it mean? And how can the elements of being mindful work with the industries in our world that will empower them to make a difference? And also to empower just simple people. When I say simple, I mean, you don't have to be a CEO of, a Fortune 500 company to be a leader. And a lot
Absolutely.
of us think in terms of our boss or a supervisor or, a parent, somebody who's above us, right, telling
Yeah.
us what to do. But when you're walking down the street, you're a leader. If you're in a classroom, you're a leader. You are showing everyone around you, what you exhibit is what, brings people aware. So,
Absolutely. And I would add one thing to that,
yeah.
that the people who are in positions of power
Hmm.
a lot of times are absolutely no better than you. Every time are no better than you, right? Just because they're in that position does not make them any more valuable than you. And so often we put people in positions like on a pedestal,
Hmm.
and they have no right to be on a pedestal. That's part of what I am so passionate about is I see people on the pedestals who should not be there,
Oh, yeah.
you know? And so we shouldn't treat them like they're some sort of godly figure because they're not. They're just as simple as the rest of us.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the ways to separate yourself from the people who aren't paying attention is figuring out a way. The essence of being mindful, of using mindfulness, really has to do with just being aware of what's going on. The young people in my building who can walk past another person like we're vapor, um, it still stuns me, and maybe it's just because of my age or the profession that I'm in. But really paying attention to what's going on around you, and sometimes that's hard because it's counterintuitive to think about the now, because we have all been brainwashed that the only way to be successful is to multitask and do 20 different things at the same time. You see, the act of being mindful, the practice, it's the exact opposite of what we all do day in and day out. We rush about and we obsess about, completing task after task after task without any airtime, about what's really going on around us. So, it's getting the kids out the door, preparing meals, going to work, exercise, coaching your kids, whatever. I mean, does that sound familiar to you?
Oh my gosh, it's so familiar to me. And like I used to be a part of the people who would never look up from their phones. And so I understand how crazy it is, because I've lived on both ends of the what's going on with that. Right. I've been the guy looking at their phone all the time, and I've been the guy now more often than not. I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes. I can admit that. But more often than not, I can walk around and look, and I see what's going on. It's one of the things I always think of, and I don't remember who first told this to me, but like the zombie apocalypse is already here. Like seriously, like people are like drones and like it's already here. Oh my gosh. You need to look up from your phone and realize you're not a zombie. There is life going on right here in front of you. And it has another negative side effect, that people being on their phones all the time really contributes to what's been called the epidemic of loneliness. The epidemic of loneliness, because you're so focused on the phone, you don't make real human connections with anybody, and you feel alone all the time. And so you're like this.
Yeah, it's biological. It really is. I mean, as people, we are programmed to be part of a community. As people, we're programmed to be a family and to have loving relationships. So, when you see people who are like running around all the time, I mean, for me, it feels like people are so preoccupied. It's actually become a little dangerous out there. Speaking
it
for
definitely
myself,
has become dangerous.
Sure. I mean, have you ever driven home from someplace and you get home and you take your keys out of the ignition and you're like, I don't remember driving home. Has that ever happened?
That's definitely happened to me. Or
how did I get here?
You know what scares me worse? When I'm actually paying attention to what's going on the road, and I'm looking around and I see somebody on their phone in the car, not looking where they're going at all. It's not even like this going on. They're like this. And I'm like,
dude,
what?
Yeah, I see that. And I have to think, the only thing that stops me from getting out of my car and rapping on their window is knowing that my children would be filled with scorn if I did something like that. I would just embarrass the heck out of them. But, I tell you, it's just everyone trying to be Superman or Wonder Woman on steroids instead of consciously focusing on what's going on around you has caused a tremendous rift. And that rift in people's inability to have a one-on-one connection or even to make eye contact. Making eye contact is an elementary biological method of communication. The eyes are the into the soul. The eyes show what's going on inside of you. And so being mindful is really a practice. It's something that you actually do. And so to bring it to the forefront, we have to get enough people to understand that that's really what they want to do. And, the challenge is to bring everything you're thinking about in the future, like what am I going to do tomorrow or in the next 5 minutes, back. And then everything that's in the past, why did I do that? Why did I say that? I shouldn't have bought that. What am I doing? Bring all that into the future so just right now, you can have a little idea, of where you actually are and what's going on around you.
Absolutely. And that's so needed because I'm trying to remember where I heard this. A lot of times people try and live in the future,
Hmm.
but then they don't know what to do now. And so the future never comes and they get upset because they can't figure out how to get the future to come here.
Yeah.
Or they live in the past and they think of all the things they wish they would have done and nothing ever changes and gets better. So then they become depressed there. And basically, when you know that the future doesn't seem to be working and the past doesn't seem to be working, a lot of people end up falling into nihilism, where they don't believe anything works. So why does it even matter?
Yeah.
And what they need to be doing is they need to come into the now. The future is great, but you need to bring it back into the now so you can get there. The past is great. However, you need to figure out what you need to do now to either get similar results or to change the results for the better.
Correct. I have a little exercise that I do with people to
I
get
like
them
exercises.
to realize. You like exercises?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So for the next few minutes, just make a genuine effort to recognize the emotions that these questions bring up in you when you try to come up with an answer. All right?
All right.
How many times a day do you say, today I have to fill in the blank?
How many times a day? It makes me want to laugh because I try to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to say it quite a bit.
How often do you ask yourself, and what about the?
And what about the? You know what? I don't think I say that one.
Okay.
That might just be me, and I'm a oddball anyways. But I could see people say that a lot.
What about my kid's report card? What about, what are we going to have for dinner? All these different types. Okay. And what about?
Okay.
How many did I call the dentist? I know I have to call the dentist.
Okay.
There's always these things that you need to do. So that's the context.
That context, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I definitely say those a few times a day as well.
Okay, so then the last one is, how will I ever blank?
Well, see, I say that question, but I say it in a very different way.
Good.
Because most people say,
you've been enlightened.
Yes. Yes. Most people are like, how will I ever? Actually, this recently happened to me. I'm not going to go into the full details because there's a lot working around this and a lot of future plans. But something happened to a friend of mine, and I wanted to try and figure out something to do to help them. And I couldn't think of anything to do right away. And the first thing I said is like, what can I do to help them? And like literally 5 seconds later, my mind went, what can I do to help them? And it went from this feeling of like, I can't do anything to, I wonder, what can I do? Same words, but the different mentality. Mm-hmm. And so I know exactly what you're getting at here. Most people say it in a way that disempowers them.
Correct.
It's completely out of their control.
Right.
I tend, not perfectly, but tend to think of it the other way, where I'm thinking, what can I do?
Right.
Well,
part of it is that as people are going through their day, and I'm guilty of this still, of course, as well, is you start daydreaming.
Yes.
And, how many times have you been like sitting in line, or you're in line to pay for your groceries, and the line moves up and you didn't. And all of a sudden you realize like, oh, geez, I got to catch up. Hello, you're in line. Follow the leader here. Or maybe the cashier asks you a question and you're just so in your own head that you don't even reply. I mean, these things happen constantly. So,
yeah.
Or
with your significant other.
Absolutely.
They're like, hey, are you listening to me?
Hello?
And you're like, huh?
What?
Huh? I've been guilty of that one. I'll raise my hand first and say, yes, I've been guilty of that one.
Okay, it's fair. So, and then just one more example, and don't tell my clients or my kids, but I mean, have you ever thought of something that you needed in the next room, and you walk in there, it took you 2 seconds, and when you get there, you're like, what the hell did I come in here for? Please tell me that's happened to you, because I know it happens to me, and my friends tell me it happens to them.
I'm pretty sure that feeling happens to me at least once a day. And if it's not once a day, it's once every other day.
But it's because from the second you make a decision, you just need to walk into the other room. Something else has already replaced that thought as you start to take action. And that's what we're trying to pull, to rein in so that you have a chance to do that. So, when we recognize what's going on around us, and we recognize it without any kind of judgment, because, so many people, like, you get mad, and then you think, damn, how am I supposed to take care of this? And it's, if you can look at it in a calmer way, and this takes practice. It takes practice over and over and over to change the way that you think and to change the way that you address something. I mean, if you get a flat tire, or your credit card gets denied, if there's some crappy thing that's happened, it's okay to realize that your emotional state's maybe not what you want it to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the past year, I've actually had 2 flat tires. So I know that feeling intimately well.
Yeah. That's, maybe it's time for new tires, Cody. That could be the answer.
It was 2 different cars.
Oh, all right. Well,
so it wasn't even it wasn't even the same car. So I'm just like, I tend to do a lot of driving though.
Right,
and sometimes the highways are just a mess. That's a whole different story.
Yeah, construction and everything else. Right.
So that's always fun stuff.
Yeah.
But definitely it's okay to realize you're a human and to understand that these emotions are going to come up and just overcome you at some points. And it's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing either. It's just something that is, and we can learn over time to overcome those first impulses. I work with some of my clients to do this, and they'll be the first ones to tell you that it's not easy, because they tell me that week to week to week, they're like, this happened again, this happened again, this happened again. But typically, the more you work on it, the less it happens.
Well, one of the first things that we talk about in the negotiation skills, which we'll get more into, is don't say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's not very flattering, and sometimes it's confrontational. And to quote one of my first mentors, he says, if you poke the bear pokes back. And, you learn, and when you are learning to negotiate as a young person, as a young lawyer, it's jab, retreat. And that's not what we're looking for here anymore. It's a different way of confronting, what the issues are. And so, when we spend a lot of our time on autopilot, we miss out on the beauty of what's going on around us. But from a business and leadership perspective, you miss out on opportunities, new opportunities that may be knocking to come into your life that you haven't noticed. We met in February at the podcasting thing, and then we both went on with our lives and our businesses, and then you reached out to me, and here we are. I mean, you don't know what is one thing is going to lead to another. So having the faith that that'll go, and that kind of knowledge can bring you a lot more success. that awareness.
Absolutely. And you were talking about the jab retreat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge martial arts enthusiast. I've
Oh,
been
okay.
practicing martial arts for 20 years. And so I understand the whole mindset of you jab, you get out, you jab, you get out, you jab, punch, and you're trying to make sure you have enough range to get them, but you stay away enough that they don't hit you. However, most martial arts schools, what they teach is that if there is any way you can avoid the battle to start, that's what you want to do. You don't want to go into the battle doing the jabs, because guess what? You don't know if they're a good person. You don't know if they're stronger than you. You don't know what else they have on them. It could be a knife. It could be a gun. And guess what? They may actually end up being someone you need in your life right now.
Right.
And you could, instead of turning them into an enemy, turn them into an ally.
Right.
And that it's so much more powerful to have that person as an ally than an enemy. And in leadership, it's so important to realize that, especially with teams. Because if you have this person on your team and something goes wrong and the first thing you do is jab, they're immediately going to be in fight mode or flight mode, right? Depending on if they like conflict or not. Some people love conflict. Some people despise conflict. And if they're in fight mode, they'll punch right back. And if they're in flight mode, they're like, okay, I'm just not going to say anything, and I'm going to shut down, and I'll probably never say anything again, right? And in either case, you've lost them as an ally completely.
And not just in that meeting. You've lost them for the next several years.
Yeah.
Unless you do something consciously to try and repair the damage that's been done. And it's a whole lot easier to bite your tongue. And that was a hard thing for me to learn. It really was. But, if you bite your tongue for just a minute, I have been in many negotiations where, one of the things you have to know is when to shut up. Because if you're listening to what the other side is saying, they may be agreeing with you. And if you're so wrapped up in your own agenda and your own criteria of how this is supposed to go, you're going to miss the fact that they're agreeing. I mean, I've had one spouse listening to what the other one was saying and freak out. And I look at them and I'm like, wait, what's wrong with you? She said yes. And they're like, what? She said yes, or he said yes. Because they don't see it. They don't hear it.
Yeah. And they're so ready to fight, right? That they're even if the other person goes like, I don't want to fight, they see the hands go up and they're like, oh, they're getting ready to punch, let's go. Right? And then they punch the other person, and instead of giving up, right? They're like, oh, I was going to be with you. Now I'm getting into the battle again. And then it just repeats itself like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's how the elements of being mindful, once you cultivate a greater awareness of your own thoughts, and you develop an ability to feel and hear what other people are saying and what they are, then when you sit down to negotiate, you are so far ahead of the person on the other side of the table, because unless they are in sync with you, they're scared. They're scared because when you have control over your attitude, you have control over the tone of your voice, you use body language knowingly, I'm telling you, the other side can't help but feel the level of the tension seep out of the room. That's the true magic of this technique. And when people are disarmed by calmness, one of my favorite things is snacks. Put chocolate in the room. It helps. It really does. It's my secret weapon. But people react to that. You know, it's like when you have two aggressors. You remember using magnets when you were a kid in school? Remember the magnets?
I still use magnets sometimes because I'm
Okay.
fascinated by them.
Okay, so if you have, you know, you need a negative and a positive to connect. But if you have two people or two positives or two negatives pushing against each other, and neither one of them is willing to make a break, you know, there's always like that weird little bubble between the magnets.
And you're like, I can almost touch them, and then they don't touch. Yeah.
And then they won't touch. That's how this technique works. You have to shift. You got two people being negative, nothing's going to happen. Or somebody's going to really not be happy with the result of the negotiation. But if you shift from being one of the positives to the negative, I mean, I got that backwards. If you shift from being one of the negatives to being positive, to bringing good energy and a positive attitude and reasonable alternatives to the table, then they can come to an agreement. And sometimes people are shocked. Like, you know, after 2 or 3 hours, they're like, oh, that's it? Yeah. You know, it's not always that way. I'm not Pollyanna. It doesn't always work. I'm not going to pretend that it does. But you sure have a better chance of a win-win solution when you have, people who are willing to be open. Or at least meet me halfway, because I'll go further than halfway. Yeah. And I do it, and I don't do it out of fear. I don't regret it. But by leading people and teaching other leaders and other folks to negotiate or to address conflicts that they have, by being open and responsive to what the other side is saying, you know, occasionally they got a good point of view about something. Nobody's completely wrong. Well, I can think of a few people, but
it's rare.
Rare. Correct. Yeah.
Definitely. Within the context of biting your tongue with the first thought, one of the things I like to tell a lot of people is that you can't always control the first thought. However, you're in complete control of the second thought.
Yes.
And so if you want to have control in a conversation, right, and control of yourself, not control of the other person, but control of yourself, so you don't make a fool of yourself or you don't get into a fight that's unnecessary,
right?
Don't react to the first thought. Hear the first thought and then have the second thought of, is that thought even true, right? Is that actually what's going on? And then go with whatever the second thought tells you, because you're in control of that one, 100%.
And with more practice, you learn how to think that way. You learn how to say, oh, that's not going to work. And you pause. And that's a big part of it. So, let's switch, if it's okay with you, to some more of the negotiation techniques. Okay. Yeah. So, when you think about the historical pattern of negotiations, I always loved watching the Flintstones, and the conflict is resolved with a club and you hit the guy over the head. Pop. Right. So now, fast forward into the situations where we have conflict, that club is like, it's just like having a tantrum, banging your fist on the desk, jumping up and telling people, forget it, walking out the door. And of course, you have to slam the door for good measure. Otherwise, you're just not making a point.
Of course, exactly.
So really, conflict hasn't changed since the Stone Age. It's really just, we think that we're so much more grown up.
Yeah, and advanced.
Right. So, the thing is, if you have a situation, if you walk into, and it's not just the boardroom, it's everywhere. It's the bedroom, it's with your kids, it's in the grocery store, it's driving. I mean, driving in Jersey is like a, life-altering, scary event. You really have to be aware. So, but if you're in a situation where it's only me against you, and there can only be one winner, that's your attitude, then it's not going to be, there's never a win-win situation. But and so tell me if this process sounds familiar. This is a classic negotiation where I say something, you respond. You say something, I respond. And once that process goes, we either come to an agreement, either an agreement is or it isn't reached, correct? I mean, anybody who has kids knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They've been down this way. So if you're open to, taking a look at how that works, people wonder, well, what are people going to think of me? Dr. Margaret Neal is a professor of management at Stanford University, and she talks about how, people are afraid to ask for what they want. And, especially women in her field in particular, but, are too demanding? Am I too greedy? What's it going to matter? And, my advice is just do it. It can't hurt. That's where the phrase like, well, it really doesn't hurt just to ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. Sometimes people say yes, they do. And they follow the path that you've set out for them.
Absolutely. And I see that really prevalent in my generation and the next generation coming up. Mm-hmm. They see something that they'd like and they'd be like, oh no, I can't do that. Like it's automatically and you like sometimes I have insider information where like I'll know what they're asking for and the other person they're trying to ask for it from. And I'm like, why not? Do you know that person? Because I actually know them, and if you just ask them, they'll totally go for it.
Right.
And they're like, no, I can't do that. I can't be that bold, or like that's way outside of my comfort zone. It's like,
exactly.
Just try.
Right.
Because what's the worst that's going to happen? Mm-hmm. They say no, and then you're exactly in the same space, and it doesn't matter anyways. Right. And they forget after a day. Oh my gosh! And then what's the best that can happen? They say yes, they were actually looking for someone to ask that, right. And everybody wins.
Yes. Yep. Well, one of the negotiation technique that I like to focus on is using the elements of mindfulness just to set yourself up to be in a positive place, but then focusing on interest-based negotiations. So interest-based negotiations are where instead of looking for what I want and what they want, is to try and find things, brainstorm, come up with things that will work for both of you. Is there a situation that would resolve both of your problems? So, have you heard the story of the orange? It's one of my favorites. It really illustrates how these negotiations work.
I can't say I have, so hit me with it.
Okay. So this mother walks into the kitchen and her two kids, her son and her daughter, are fighting because there's only one orange left in the fruit bowl. And they're having, a brawl over who gets this orange. So the mother's like, well, wait a minute. What do you need the orange for? And the daughter wants to bake a cake, so she needs the peel of the orange so she can flavor her cake. And the boy, he's hungry. He wants to eat it. So she peels the orange, and she gives the rind to her daughter, and she gives the meat of the orange to her son. And they're both happy, and they walk away. But most people would never dawn on them. Maybe they would cut the orange in half, right, and give them each half, but then they wouldn't have everything that they wanted, and the half they didn't use goes to waste. So the point of the interest-based is their position was, the children both had the same position. I want the orange, and you can't have any. But the interest they had was one wanted to eat it, and one needed the rind. So once she looked at what their interests were, she's able to come up with a resolution that solves the problem completely.
That's absolutely, it's brilliant. It's
I didn't make
absolutely
it up. I can't
brilliant.
take credit for it. It is illustrative of what
As
I'm.
far as I know, you made it up. So
Okay.
we're
I
for the
didn't.
points of this summit, it's all you.
Okay.
But like it's so brilliant because so often people are looking for very specific things.
Mhm.
And even within a divorce, I'm sure this happens a lot where people want very specific things and they don't care about the other things.
Right, right.
And if you can say like, well, they want this, do you actually care about that? And they're like, no, whatever. Then you can give them that. And if they and once you give someone something, they want to reciprocate. And so
Correct.
so you say, okay, you want this, right? Do you want that?
Mhm.
And they're like, no, I don't really care about that. Boom. Now everyone wins.
Well, we can stop now because yes, that's exactly what.
Boom.
Boom.
We have solved the world's problems. No one ever needs to be needs to go
Conflict
through
again.
a conflict again.
Yes.
World peace.
World peace is
Amen.
next. Excellent.
Boom.
I have accomplished my mission of awakening as many agents of peace in the world as I can. That's my mission.
Oh my goodness.
But the conflict gets resolved faster because all of the negotiators are trying to come up with something that satisfies both sides. It's not just thinking about, well, what's going to work for me and the hell with you. It's more about what can we both do that will bring us a better decision. And when you try to resolve something where both parties, technically win, it calls for a lot of brainstorming. It calls for creativity, which is why a lot of people aren't very good at it. They're very stuck and rigid in their thinking. But when you do it that way, both sides leave with a solution. It may not be what they thought in the beginning was going to work, but the creativity of the people working to resolve it can come up with a solution where everybody is comfortable with the solution. And that blows people's minds. Like it doesn't really happen instinctively because our entire culture is win or lose. From the very first time you're in Little League till you're in the valedictorian of your class. I mean, it's win or lose, top or bottom. But that's not. I really think the world is shifting. Certainly, the energy for a lot of people. And if you can look for gains for both people that aren't immediately obvious, that's really a powerful, powerful tool.
Absolutely. I just remembered something that's really funny. I used to umpire Little League when I was like 12 years old, right? And so there were games, and I remember this happening where I'm 12-year-old kid umpiring like 6-year-olds, right? And there are coaches who are literally yelling at me. They're grown 30-plus-year-old men yelling at me because of a call I made. Like it's the end of the world.
Right.
And it's all like, I'm 12 years old. I make mistakes. They're 6 years old. They don't care. They just want to have fun.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
And like they're so ready to battle, and they're not looking at like the overall picture. Like, okay, he's 12 years old. He made a mistake. Maybe if I tell him like, hey, that didn't look quite right, maybe he'll nix another one of the calls to make it even. Right? Or they'll look at the kids and like the kids all like, oh, I was up to bat. Yay. Like, and they'll look at the kid and be like, well, at least the kid's happy. Right? Like they don't care if they win or lose at that point. They're just happy that they're out there playing. And so I can live comfortably with that. Like they're so focused on their perspective, right? Like this, like I have to win, right? Which like the kids don't care about that. The umpire doesn't care about that. Let's
play ball.
Yeah, let's just play ball.
Right.
Exactly. And within like the business world, one of the things that I was thinking happens sometimes is you could have a leader, right? with two different employees. Both hate how their job is going right now. One says, I'm overworked. I have too much going on. The other says, I feel like I'm not being utilized enough. Oh my gosh, you have too much work. What are some of the things you're good at? Well, I'm good at this. I'm good at that. He's doing some of that work. So if I take a little load off of you and put it over here, you have less work, you have more work, you're both happy. Boom. We have a better team. We can get better results.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the work that the team produces is more reflective of what the company wants to have accomplished, because each employee's work isn't tainted by that negative energy that they're bringing to their work.
Exactly.
Because you manage to shift their perspective and also to enhance the perspective of the other person. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it all ties into creativity, which is a dying art, sadly. And two, I think there's like a misconception with creativity, that creativity is like art, right? And like, I'll be creative if I can paint. And if I can't paint, I can't be creative. And that's not true, especially in the business world, usually, unless you're in art business world, then it's, it's kind of matters.
We're creative.
But like for most businesses, it's not about being able to draw that makes you creative. It's about coming up with possibilities. That's where the creativity lies, and it's so needed. Right. And so you can be that, like the parent with the two kids, but you can be that in that same situation as the leader with your employees.
Right. And one of the things that we do in our work a lot that is a good focal point is learning how to generate options. I mean, when I meet with a new client, a very, very important element of our discussion is, well, what are your goals? What would you like to accomplish here? And if they say, I want to annihilate my spouse, then I don't work with them, because that's not your MO. That's not my world anymore. But people pause. They have never thought about it. And to ask them that question forces them to come into the negotiation with, well, what's really important to me? And what's pleasing is, they want their kids to be okay. They want to have, enough money to do what they need to do. Maybe they want to stay in their home. But by doing that, it gives you a roadmap of what you need to focus on. But I can't tell you how many people sit there like with this blank look on their face. They're just either shell-shocked to find themselves, in the process, or they just nobody's asked them that question.
Yeah. And the sad state of affairs in the world is most people haven't been asked that question. What do you want? Right? So often people are asked, what are you going to do? Or where are you going to go with that? But not, what do you actually want? And so we've got this idea that like, okay, we're getting a divorce. We need to go to divorce court, or we need to get lawyers to do this. But they're not like, what do I want the outcome of this to be? They are just already in the process.
Exactly.
And as leaders, we have to realize that a lot of the people who are on our teams have never been asked that. They don't know what they want because no one's asked them, what do they want? And we can be that person that does ask them that. And by asking them that, we can figure out how can they impact at a higher level so they can create new results, better results, and repeatable results.
Right. And to bring all of those skills, not just, obviously in the office, but in their daily lives. These techniques are just as useful in a traffic jam as they are in, a team meeting.
Absolutely.
It's just a nicer way to make the world around you and the things that you have to deal with on a daily basis more palatable and gentler. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with, the other thing that I talk about, if we have, time to go into it, is just,
We got time. We're good.
oh, okay. So, when there are objective parts of negotiating too, besides the mindset, you have to have the right mindset. And that's what I try to teach my clients, my corporate clients to generate that. But there are some practical things too that are absolutely necessary. I'll just take a minute to go into it to have a successful negotiation. And one of them is you have to make a checklist of everything you're going to need for that meeting, and also create an environment for success.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a meeting and you need statistics that were sitting on your desk, and you had 100 things on your mind and you didn't grab them, and now you're sitting there and you're not ready. Even the easy things like charts, copies of reports, appraisals, your laptop, a calculator, any research, all those physical things make a difference. And if you're making chocolate, yes, yes, chocolate and nuts. Yeah, I'm actually I have a fine reputation for having the best snacks in the county.
Boom, there you go.
So, but the other thing is to set an environment where people can function and can listen. In order to open their minds, they have to have enough of a calming sensory experience to let that happen. If there's a jackhammer on outside, nobody's going to think about anything. And another thing, and this does not go over well, is I ask everybody to put their cell phones mute in the middle of the table. Sometimes they'll go for it, sometimes they won't. But nothing is more irritating than you get to a real good slice of the pie. You're making progress. People are starting to warm up to each other to make progress. And then the other lawyer takes a call from their office, yak, 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 yak. It's my kids calling. I'll just be a minute. And, it sets it back. It just blows it back so far. And, that's really tough.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful thing. They've actually done research around phones. And they did this really interesting study where they took a group of students to do a test, right? And they were all allowed to have their phones. And their performance was kind of subpar. Versus the group of students they tested who didn't have access to their phones at all, right? Which did significantly better. Now, they also tested this. What happens if the students didn't have their phone, but the teacher had their phone? And if the phone is still in the same room as them, they also found that the results decline.
Mm-hmm.
Just the vision of the phone being there produces lower results. Fascinating thing. I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, it's not a surprise because they are distracted. They're absolutely distracted. Another important piece of leadership is making sure that when you are in a position of having to make a decision, of being in a negotiation, is you either have to be or you have to have access to the decision maker. Who gets to really pull the trigger on this when it's time? Because you can talk and talk and talk, and you can take as many notes and write as many contracts as you want. But if you don't have access to the person who says, do it, or has the authority to do it, you've just wasted so much time.
Absolutely.
And that used to really drive me crazy when I was in court. And, somebody say, well, I have to call the main office. And you just... People start fighting when you're taking the time to call the main office. You need to have that authority there.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's a common problem. It's something that you wouldn't think, people think that professionals are always professional and they've covered every base, but they haven't. And when they haven't, that's a real problem.
Absolutely. Just like how people think people in leadership positions must be these great people. And
Mm-hmm.
we discover a lot of times they're actually not these great people, sadly,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they're just trying to become a better person. They just haven't figured out how to get there yet.
Right, right.
And like that happens so often. And to assume that just because they're there or they're considered a professional or that, or that whatever else you want to assume, a lot of times it's just not true.
Yes. Yeah. And then another very, very important part of accomplishing your goals in negotiations is before you go into the negotiation, you need to know what is your acceptable bottom line? How far are you what are you willing to give? And then the other end of the spectrum is what is your home run? What would you say is great? Because by discussing these alternatives, you have to ask yourself, well, if this negotiation fails, what are the consequences for my company? What are the consequences for my employees? And if you have to ask yourself in advance, what is the answer to that? Because only by knowing what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, you can figure out which way the discussion should be going and how much you should do. Because having a bottom line ahead of time and knowing what a home run was going to look like does three really important things. I mean, the first thing is it gives you a roadmap so that you know how to conduct your negotiation and keep everybody on task. The other thing it does is it gives you some objective criteria to evaluate an offer that comes from the other side. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, and I'll say to people, well, what do you want? Like, what would be a good result for you? And you get like this blank stare. Like, haven't you thought about this? Like what you think a win would look like? And then the last component is it gives you a very clear litmus test so that when you're done, you can say, this was successful or this wasn't successful. And that advance work by your team, by your people, by yourself, depending on what's coming up, to be negotiated is so key to your success.
Absolutely. And it's almost scary how often people don't know what it is they want and don't know what the worst acceptable result they'll take is.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially if you're going into a negotiation, not knowing that makes it the Wild West.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And like you never know what people are going to do in the Wild West. That's why it's the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to avoid that, you have to figure out something that'll allow you to, have the guideline of where you should be going.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then once somebody makes you an offer, if it falls within the parameters of the bottom line and the home run, you're getting close.
Yeah.
And one of the things in mediation, I always, I want my clients to have some independent legal advice so that when they come to see the mediator, they're not miles apart with unrealistic expectations or not understanding what their rights and their responsibilities are. It's like, do that first so that when you come into my office, you're only this far apart. And it saves time, money, stress. I mean, just everything you can think about.
Absolutely. One thing that I heard within that I think is really important is expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you know what the expectations are, it's a lot easier to figure out where to go to. Again,
Right.
if you don't have those expectations, it's like the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
And people make the assumptions that they're going to make, and try and go with it, but then it ends up in chaos, which is why you need to have that structure there, those expectations, right? Like, you're probably not going to get everything, and they're probably not going to get nothing. That's an
Nothing.
expectation you should have
Mhm.
going into this.
Right. I mean, we use, an expression, a settlement is when everybody's not really happy. Like, they're happy enough, but if one side is really happy and the other side is really angry, then that's not a good settlement. It's not what's really fair. And you want to remember that when you start to negotiate, what is the most important thing is not really to get any deal. Just say, no, all right, that's behind me. That doesn't work. You want to get a good deal. And by developing the ability to set yourself up for success while you negotiate, and then also keeping, those parts of the mindful techniques in mind as you're going, it's really very powerful. I've had wonderful success with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what you need at the end of the day in this scenario is success, right?
Yes. And, when you start to think about what the options are and what the consequences are of coming up with a solution that both people are comfortable with, it generates an energy that gets things moving. I find in my cases that, in the beginning, people are tentative. Nobody really wants to commit to anything. But once you get rolling and you've finished your due diligence and you know what information is, one person takes that first step, and then it shifts into, okay, we're going to figure this out. And once they make that shift, you can put the pieces together. I mean, we don't sing Kumbaya. There's still some tears and some swearing, and it's a gut-wrenching process, but they come to it prepared to negotiate, prepared to make a deal, a settlement that's going to work for their family. And the exact same principles apply in business and in your community. Again, we talked about, talking about some community organizers when something's going on that needs to be addressed. All of those things work together to promote, I'm expecting, much better results for people.
Absolutely. And Joanne, because we're running close to the time here. If you had one thing that you would want to leave with everybody, just one thing, what would be that one thing you'd leave with them?
It's absolutely possible and rewarding and satisfying. Change how you look at conflict. Don't look at conflict as a problem. Don't look at it as a wall that you can't get over. Think of it as interest-based. What do they want? What do I want? And be open to suggestions. Be open to the thought that, we might really be able to figure this out. Because a lot of people assume they can't. But if you assume you can, and you bring these elements to what you're doing, you'll be really surprised. And you'll have a nicer day. You really will.
Absolutely. I love that because so often people just assume they can't do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
But if you start to begin to assume you can do all these different things, all of a sudden that creativity is able to flourish and you're able to find all the different things you're looking for. And sometimes even more that you weren't expecting. Right. And within conflict management, that's so important. Within negotiations, that's so important to be able to believe that there is some sort of resolution we can get to. Yeah. So important.
And that by working together, you have a much better chance at coming up with a resolution that's win-win. than by attacking one another.
Absolutely, 100%. And I
Yes.
know that you've got a gift for the people who've stayed through. So what is your gift for everyone?
Yes, I have provided a copy. It's an ebook that I have on 5 strategies to improve your business relationship edge. And it's actually 20 tips in 5 categories, 5 chapters, all of which are, some of them are obvious, but you don't think about it. And so it's a way for people to take it. It's generic enough that it applies in every business, but it's sharp enough that you're going to learn a lot. And so I'm glad to share that with everyone.
Awesome. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's phenomenal. And the thing is, you said it's simple, and yet so often it's the simple things that we forget. And it's the simple things that we don't actually utilize that would actually completely change everything going on for us.
And then you're stunned. You're stunned when you get such a nice result.
Yeah. Exactly. There are whole companies that are literally dedicated to that concept of just the little things will literally change everything.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. And with that, that is basically the end of our session for the Legendary Leadership Summit. No, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. There's been, I wasn't expecting myself to be jabbing and stuff during any of these sessions. And so like to have the opportunity to do that was a lot of fun for me. So thank you for everything that you've brought into this conversation.
Thank you. And you're welcome.
Awesome.